Hey, everybody, welcome to another episode of Something More Fulfilling. On today's podcast, we actually have Myff Galloway from Australia, and she is a life and performance coach, a former professional athlete, and now a performance coach helping women achieve life at the next level. So, without further ado, welcome, Myff.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited for our chat today.
All right, let's jump right into it. Give us a little bit of background on how you got into that pro level sports and then what made you transition.
Yeah, so like with a lot of things, it makes sense when you connect the dots backwards. It probably did make a lot of sense to me at the time, but I was someone who going through school did quite well, got good grades, and anything that I applied myself to, I was quite successful at. And whether that was academically or in the sporting field, I guess you could say that I'm naturally gifted in terms of sport. But then I think what happened in terms of professional sport, my link to getting there was, and I'd love to explore this further on the podcast with you, but I think during school, we're told that to be successful, you need to get A's. And success looks a particular way. For me, my I guess, entry into professional sport happened in a similar sort of way. So I was doing every sport imaginable at school until one day, actually, I was playing soccer. And I was told I needed to lose a little bit of weight to be more competitive at soccer. And my father, who is a really keen road cyclist, suggested that I take up road cycling. You know, a bit of endurance. That's apparently how you lose weight. That's a myth that I'd love to disprove later. But it was true for me at the time. So I took up cycling and naturally started getting pretty good at it. And then I was told that I could be really good at it. And so I was like, okay, if someone says I can be really good at it, then let's give it a crack. And so I applied myself specifically to road cycling and ended up competing for Australia for a couple of races and then racing for a professional team towards the end of my career as well.
Wow. So, in terms of what drove you, what really drives you to continue to train? Because I know that the people that are very good at sports have an inner drive that really propels them to do the work that when it's not pleasant, right? I know that there are so many athletes that I see nowadays, young kids, where their parents seem to be dragging them to practice. They're like, "Come on, Johnny, you need to go to practice. Let's go. Let's get in the car. You're missing practice, right?" How were you different?
Yeah, so I guess my attitude towards sport and achievement was very different back then. I have a much different relationship, and I would say a much healthier relationship to performance and achievement now. But back when I was cycling, it was all around proving that I was good enough. Quite as simply as that. That's what was motivating me. I didn't have the words to
Mm.
articulate it at the time. I've always been passionate by human performance and just exploring what humans are capable of. So that was that intrinsic motivation. But if I was really honest with myself at the time, I didn't particularly enjoy the sport of road cycling. I loved what it enabled me to do, and that was travel the world, get quite good success, get the accolades, and push myself and have an excuse to focus purely on my performance. But at the end of the day, I didn't love it. And the reason why I was doing it and sacrificing as much as I did and not loving it is because I wanted to prove to everyone that I was good enough.
That is so self-aware because I think I think we all have a superpower and some of it's athletics and some of it is, looking beautiful, right? And sometimes we kind of over rely on it to get our significance,
Yeah.
right? And I think for me, I definitely overused that over the years where I was pretty good at the athletics and played sports and played in college but not to any level like professionally, but I felt derived my significance and my value and self worth from the accolades, right?
Mm.
And recognition from peers as well as family and friends. And yeah, I think we sometimes think about that and you may not like those hours sitting on the saddle because I remember cycling and I was like, man, I don't really enjoy this that much, but crossing that finish line and getting the congrats sometimes was made it worth it, even though you're like, man, this should be more fun, but it isn't.
Totally.
And sometimes it takes, like you said, the dots are easier to connect when you look backwards, right? Because you don't really get the, I guess, the fortune of wisdom that you get many years later when you're like you do a lot of self-reflection, or like the visibility of like the years behind you that you get when you walk back and talk about it many years later and kind of see that. So why did you end up leaving it then?
Yeah, I mean, especially when you're doing something from a deep-seated motivation, whether it's a health, let's say healthy and unhealthy for lack of better terms. It's easier to keep doing the thing than it is to change. And it was really hard for me to change despite, me not being 100% fulfilled. And I think again, looking back, my body was giving me all sorts of signals along the way that this wasn't right for me. I got Achilles tendonitis, which meant that I couldn't put on my cycling shoes, let alone turn the pedal. And despite that, my team were like, no, we need you to start this race. And it was on cobblestones. And it was probably one of the most painful experiences of my life. And then I got to the point, I had a hip injury that no one really knew what was going on with. And what would happen is after a couple of hours in the saddle, my whole left leg would go numb. So I didn't have access to as much power as I could.
Ooh.
And so I was still putting in the hours, putting in the work, but my body's going, nah, this is not working for you. But despite that, I think the real big moment for me was I was riding as part of the largest women's race in the world at the time, which was the Giro d'Italia and the women's version of that. And we're going down a 20-kilometer climb. In Europe, you have these beautiful mountain descents that I still dream about going down. And I remember a woman going around a corner and she overshot the corner and went off the edge. And it was one of those corners, one of those crashes where you're like, oh my gosh, I hope she is okay. She was fine. But I said to myself in that moment, if that was me and something had happened to me in that moment, would I be okay with that? And the answer was no. I was like, what I'm doing right now would not be worth those serious consequences. And so it was really from that day forward that I started really questioning what the hell I was doing. I was like, if I'm not willing to, because especially in professional sport, if you're not willing to push the limits of your abilities, both physically and mentally, then you won't be successful. And so that really for me was an eye opener of a moment. And I guess my transition out of sport really happened from there.
Yeah. I I totally understand that. Let me ask you something here. This is something I heard about the elite level
Yeah.
athletes here is that when you get to the top tier of athletics, whether it's, cycling or golf or what things like that, it's like physically at that point, most people are about gifted about the same
Mm.
in terms of physical ability. What separates the guy that's number one versus the guy that's top 20 only, right? That is just barely cracking the top 20 is his mindset.
Mm.
Did you find that? I guess how long was it from the time that you made that realization where you're like, I'm not 100% all in
Yeah.
anymore, right? Because now you're starting to think, because you start having that seed of doubt.
Yep.
How long was it before you were like, okay, there's too much doubt here that I can't continue doing this because you're probably not going to be performing at your highest level anymore, right? And because
Yep.
as your mind starts going and you're like, am I really doing this? Should I be doing this? Or
Mm.
what the f am I doing?
Yeah.
Still doing this?
Yep.
How long is it for you to make that shift?
It was pretty quick, to be honest, because at the end of the day, what was also motivating me was the performance. And I knew that that mindset wasn't going to be conducive to performance. And so, from memory, that race was about July, and I finished up at the end of the season, which would be in October. So, I left Europe and essentially didn't come back. I was going to take the year off to address my injuries that no one could seemingly address. Yeah, and took the time off, took the time away, and then never went back.
So I assume you went back to Australia, right?
Yeah, I went back to Australia.
Okay. So, as I've been getting into more work of just mindset and law of attraction and a lot of Joe Dispenza work. And what I have discovered is that a lot of times when you are emotionally out of alignment with the things that truly matter and what you really want, your body has a funny way of manifesting some of the misalignment in whether it's mysterious injuries or just ailments that people can't quite understand because it shouldn't be happening to somebody that say your age or your physical fitness level. Where are you at? Have you seen that correlation at all? Are you into that kind of work? Or
I'm 100% into that work. A more recent example
I
was
love it.
it's wintertime here in Australia, and it seems like there's a very large amount of people getting sick at the moment. And I connected with my friend who's a psychic, and she's like, "You're getting sick a lot at the moment, aren't you?" And I was like, "Yep." She goes, "I'm also about
Mm,
30 weeks pregnant." And she's like, there's some healing work to do here. You're getting sick because you're neglecting your inner child. Your inner child's trying to tell you something right now that needs to be addressed. And if you address this, then chances are those physical illness symptoms won't be showing up as much. And so I've been deep diving into some inner child stuff over the last few
Mm,
weeks. And boy, oh boy, has that been
wow.
incredible. So, yes, 100%. I love that work. I completely agree with it. And it's been a really big catalyst for experience that next level of fulfillment in my life by acknowledging not only the physical symptoms, but acknowledging that everything in your body is linked, and really taking that more holistic approach.
Hmm. So, in terms of taking that holistic approach, how have you say incorporated that into your everyday life?
Yeah. So I think for me, because of my sporting background, the physical body has always been a really large, big vehicle for me in terms of just showing myself exactly what I'm capable of. So what that looks like day to day now is I do exercise, some sort of movement every day. And really the point of that movement now is just to show myself what's possible, to prove to myself that I can do hard things. And I really use it as a way to grow and evolve myself as a human rather than to achieve any particular athletic pursuit or feat. So that's a large portion of what I do as part of a daily routine. In terms of mindset side of things, I really am a big believer in visualization and goal setting. So I every day I connect to I'm staring at it right now, my vision board, and really making sure that I connect with those feelings of how I want to feel about my life and what goals I have for myself and what I'd love to achieve with my family, and that sort of thing. So it's a different approach. A lot of the same things are there. I guess it's just how I approach life is a bit different now.
Oh, fantastic. So let me ask you this. Let's transition into how you jumped away from, say, sports.
Yeah.
And so, like, the thing that I struggled with when I had left a business that I basically was my identity for many years. How was that shift for you from being a pro athlete to now like everybody else, right? In terms of just like, hey, now right?
Yeah.
Because I think there is a pedestal that people put you on when you are a professional sporting athlete, right? Because it is, you're the half of 1% to even be able to do anything like that. How did it feel for you? What was the most difficult parts about, say, transitioning back into, quote unquote, the regular world?
I loved how you mentioned the term "just like everyone else" because that's exactly what I didn't wanna be, was just like everyone else. So, for a bit of
Hmm.
context as well, I'm an identical twin. And so I already have someone else who is exactly like me. Why would I want to be like everyone else as well? I think for a large portion of my life, I was trying to be different. And so transitioning out of professional cycling, I mean, I got a full-time job in retail as a manager there, but I transitioned into other sports very quickly. So I was like, "Oh, I'm not doing cycling. Let's see what other sports are out there." And I found my way into CrossFit because when you're a cyclist, you're really good at doing one thing, and that's cycling on roads. You have no upper body strength, and so the challenge of developing some upper body strength really appealed to me. When I went into CrossFit, I was terrible at a portion of CrossFit called involving Olympic lifting, which is some more complex barbell movements. And so I focused on trying to improve that as best I could. I got quite good at it. I competed at a national level for Olympic weightlifting. And so I think in terms of the identity shift, I was trying really hard to find a new sporting identity. I was like, if I can't be a professional
Mm.
cyclist, what other sporting identity can I become? And so I did that for quite some time. But surprise, surprise, the injuries that I hadn't dealt with from my cycling reared up, especially as you compete at the professional level. So I think more so now, I haven't competed professionally in a sport for, or at an elite level for maybe 3 years now because of injury and now because I'm pregnant. And that has probably been the most challenging thing is I haven't been able to identify myself as a sporting person or an elite level athlete. It's been asking myself, okay, then who the hell am I? And that's been a really large portion of
Mm.
my journey. And it's not easy, but holy hell, it's been worthwhile because you soon like learn to,
I bet.
yeah, you soon learn to appreciate yourself as all the wonderful things that you can do, just not just a label or not just one thing.
Yeah. So what kind of work did you do to make that shift more smooth? Because I know a lot of people, they pride themselves on that one thing they're really good at, right?
Mm.
So people, I know a lot of people that are professional athletes, they tear their ACL or whatever, and they go into quite a bad place.
Yeah.
Some of them face depression, some of them just kind of fall apart, in many different ways because that is all they knew. is being able to be master and commander of their body, right? So how did you able to say shift, your ability and how you demonstrate your self-worth or whatever
Yeah.
to the world and yourself and your identity from the athlete to your next phase?
Yeah, so I think, I mean, it wasn't probably just one thing that helped me. It was definitely a journey in the personal development space, but I too was a business owner, and that was a large portion of my identity and what made me different from everyone else and what I derived significance from. And unfortunately, that business venture didn't end particularly well, and I decided to leave it. And that was really the catalyst for my whole journey into, I guess, a formal journey into personal development. I remember a particular morning where, I mean, if you're an athlete, you typically have no issues getting out of bed. You're a really energized and active and outgoing person. And there was just 2 days where I couldn't bring myself to get out of bed, and I was like, this isn't normal. What's going on here? And I'd worked with psychologists previously, and I was like, no, I don't think I need to talk about this one. There's something else that needs to be done. And long story short, I found an NLP practitioner. And so within a few days, I met this woman here in Canberra, and I was in her office for 6 hours dissecting everything that had been going on
Wow.
with my life. I didn't expect to be in there for 6 hours, but I went in and then resurfaced when it was nighttime. But that was really the start of that journey for me. Was I'm pulling back all of the conditioning that I'd had over the last, it was probably 23 years of my life, being questioning who I thought I was, and why I thought I needed to be that person. That was really the catalyst for that. So really from that moment and the tools that I learned there, it was finally the opportunity that I had to start questioning everything I knew to be true about myself, which is pretty scary, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So for you, what was the one thing that you felt like you held on to the longest and had the hardest time, say, letting go of to make that shift?
Yeah, definitely. So I really love achievement, whether it's achieving anything in business, on the sporting field. And so achieving is still really important to me, but I have a very different relationship with how I achieve things and what's achievement for me. So one thing that I really discovered is you need to be really in tune with your motivations and what's important to you and why you do something. So now when I apply my skills of discipline towards achievement, I look at it as a really healthy space. Whereas before, I was probably, I like to say that if you apply discipline without purpose, you're engaging in pointless suffering. And that's probably what my life was for a long time, until I really questioned what do I want to do? What's important to me? So that was probably the big shift, was really connecting, really asking myself what's important to me and continuously connecting with that.
Okay, I want to pull on that thread a
Yeah.
little bit more. So for you, what was the why before,
Yeah.
and then what was that new why that made it more nuanced? That really made it not about pure suffering, right? Because I
Yeah.
think we're glutton for punishment. As
Yeah.
athletes are like, I'm gonna see how hard I can push my body, so how
Yeah.
sore I can make myself the next day. So what was it for you?
Yeah, so oh yeah, again with cycling, and it was probably the other areas of my life as well, until that pinnacle event, I guess, was I was achieving in areas that people had told me that I would be good at. They go, "Oh, Miff, you should try this. You'd be really good at it." I got into business because someone said, "Oh, you have some spare money. Why don't you buy into this business?" And I was like, "Sure. I don't know what I want to do with my life. Let's do this." And so it really, I think, went from being a place of wanting to show people that I was good enough, to now the
Mm.
relationship is I'm going to show myself what I'm capable of. I want to explore what my limits are in all areas of my life, not just physically, but with my relationships, with my finances, with my career. I want to just see what's possible for me in this lifetime. So it's coming from a place of lack for really a place of possibility now.
I love that. I love that. So I think I want to jump into what you do right now as in a life and performance coach, because
Mm.
I think that probably segues into really well. And it sounds like you work a lot with women. And for you, do you find that women, say, struggle with that more than men, or is that just the same for both sexes? That part of doing it out of possibility and seeing what you're really capable of.
Yeah, I think it's very dependent on the individual. I have had the opportunity to work with some incredible men, and I think most humans can resonate with the feeling of not feeling like they're good enough or feeling like they need to prove themselves. And I think yes, there's societal conditioning that means that there's probably some challenges that are more unique to women than men. For example, for men specifically, there's a narrative that you need to be the provider and need to take care of your family and all that sort of stuff. And for the woman, you need to be able to nurture and take care of others. And maybe that comes at a sacrifice to yourself. So I think, yes, on the surface, it could look different, but I think underlying, if you dig deep beneath the hood, that there's probably some similar wounds or pain points that are amongst just humans in general.
Yeah, so when you are working with, your clients,
Yeah.
and when you start initially, just like I do, I kind of do an audit, right? We
Yeah.
kind of have to figure out where they're at with everything, right?
Yep.
To kind of, before you even write a game plan, it's kind of hard when you have a map if you don't know where you start, because it doesn't
Mm.
matter what the map is if you don't know where you're at. So for you, what do you see is one or two of the things that really, the biggest red flags, or things that you see that people come to you most often with, in terms of things that really kind of holding them back?
To be honest, it's probably that they haven't actually spent a lot of time thinking about what they want their life to look like.
Mm,
A lot of people go, "If I don't know what I want," or "I have this crossroads in my life and I don't know which path I should take." And whenever anyone says "should," I'm like, "There's a red flag there. You shouldn't do anything. It's what do you want to do? What do you want to choose?" Because at the end of the day, as much as we think we don't, we actually have complete control over the direction that we choose to take our life. And so that's probably some of the biggest red flags or the clients that I find that I attract is probably me 10 years ago, really having the opportunity to question what it is that they want from their life for probably the first time ever.
that's so interesting. And here's a question that goes, even digs
Yeah.
down a little bit deeper to the next level of that same thread. Is, I think in society, with social media, there is so many things that we are taught that we should want, right? And just like, oh, he's in this cool car, or like this nice house, or these amazing getaways, and you start wondering, it's like, these people even work, or they just vacation all the time, right? And as you live in this society that is just inundating us with all this things and stuff, right?
Mm.
That supposedly make us happy, and it starts bleeding into your psyche. And how do you discern, like, what you actually want, or what you think you want because, well, what everybody else has? You know what I'm saying? Like, how do you filter through that?
Yep. I think the biggest thing for me was just questioning a lot more. I think a lot of things, because a thought pops into our mind, we go, that must be true. So, for example, if I say to you, "Hey, I'm Santa Claus," you might be like, "Oh, okay." And then you're like, "Wait a minute, I can't actually believe that you're Santa Claus. Like, give me a moment. That's not true." And so I think it for a lot of people, it's just taking the moment. And I had a great conversation with another guest on my podcast about just the pause. She actually recommended everyone taking 3 minutes just to pause and question things and to problem solve. And I was like, 3 minutes? That's nothing. Anyone can find 3 minutes. And so if you're finding yourself face a decision where you're like, is this really for me or is this really for someone else? Just pause and just ask yourself,
Hmm.
why do I think this is for me? What if it wasn't for me? What would I do instead?
Hmm. Yeah. So I guess to really discern whether you actually want it, you kind of ask yourself, if I say I want this, why is it that I really want it?
Yeah.
What is it really giving me? Or what is it, am I chasing just a sensation, or am I chasing something that truly will, say, fulfill me, versus what I would think other people would want to, or like the feeling I would get from external validation, right?
Yep.
I think that's probably, unfortunately, the thing that drives most of our kind of everyday behavior, is conditioned to say, hey, if I wear this type of shoes, we'll just say,
Mm.
and this is what everybody wears, so it must be cool, so I would
Yep.
want to wear it, and say, do I even like those shoes? Right? And a lot of times people buy stuff and you're like, those are really, it's a strange thing to buy, because maybe it doesn't even fit your style, but yet
Yeah.
people buy these things. You're like, that just looks really off, but it's the coolest t-shirt, or
Yep.
shoes, or hat, or whatever it is. So I've noticed that a lot of times for me, that somebody told me this question that you should ask yourself, which was actually kind of cool. It's like, if you were just in a room by yourself, or like, you know in some far off place, and nobody knew you, would you still actually want to buy that?
Yeah.
Because it wouldn't be about any of your friends, any of your acquaintances, knowing who you are, or what you wear, whatever it is, would you buy it because you're just like, wow, that's really a cool whatever because I like it and
Yeah.
it's pretty neat and I think it's say it's beautifully designed, piece of clothing or something that you're like, I think that would bring me some joy beyond the hey, I think I'd look cool or I'd get some, stares at from the whatever people that you find validation from.
Yeah.
So for you, your on your clients, what is it that draws them to you and your unique style?
Great question. And so I attract, as I mentioned before, clients who are really starting to question what's important to them and where they want to take their life. And I get that not only for a particular area of life, but all areas of life. And I think what the sort of client that I attract is clients that are ready to do the work and want to work hard and want some brutal, honest feedback. I approach my life in quite a direct manner. You see what you get with me, and I don't beat around the bush. And I think a lot of people really appreciate that, especially from a coach. I think, especially when you have friends and family around you and you're maybe suggesting to them that something needs to change, they love you and they want what's best for you. But if you change in their eyes, that's scary for them too. And so I think what my clients appreciate about me is I can give them those brutal facts and honesty. Whereas potentially, if they reach out to family and friends, they might not realize, but they're putting their own bias and their own needs potentially before the clients. So yeah, I think the sort of person that I attract is really just ready for change, ready for something different, and ready just to get stuck in and do the work.
I like that. I think it's important because I think when we go look for clients, there are many people that say they want to change,
Mm.
but how do you discern the people that actually want to do the work? Because a lot of
Yep.
people it's like, hey, I don't like this behavior. I don't like my current situation. I want it to be different. How do you discern the people that are the talkers versus the people that actually would do it prior to them, spending a couple sessions with you?
Yeah, and I've had talkers, and so that's made me revisit the process and my messaging and how I onboard and consult with clients. Typically, when I connect with a client for the first time who says they want to change, I give them an action. I task them, and I go, "Cool. Once you do this, reach back out to me." And if they do it, I know they're an action taker and they're ready. A lot of people won't do it.
I think I might take that tip
It
actually. That's a very
100%,
cool.
and it's not something big, it's something really seemingly easy. It's not something that's overwhelming. It might be, like make sure you go to the grocery store on a Sunday and get healthy food for the week or something like that. But I always give some small task because it will show themselves that they're ready to change as well.
Mm, yeah. I think like big changes take little steps, right? A lot of times, I think when they show up to a Tony Robbins seminar or something like that, and they're like rah rah
Yeah.
rah for the weekend, and they're like, okay, I'm gonna wake up every morning at 5 o'clock, and then I'm gonna do like 500 push-ups, and then I'm gonna run 3 miles, and then they're gonna do wholesale change of everything in their life. You know how the end result of that
Yeah.
is about a week of that or a month of that, and they're just like, F this, this is way too hard and I'm never going to achieve it because, I think it's overwhelming.
Yeah.
So for you, in terms of making people, finding the people that a want to change, how do you make sure that it is sustainable change? How do you
Yeah.
keep that expectation, in line with what is truly achievable? Because a lot of people say, I want to do all this. I want to make this thing rapid,
Mm.
but from experience, and I know that, you know, too much is oftentimes a recipe for failure, just the same of doing nothing.
Yeah, and I love what you touched on with the Tony Robbins seminar. I smile because I've attended one, and you are on a massive high after that. I'm like, I'm going to change all my life, and then you realize you go, my life still looks the same. I need to unpick that first and start building things in. I can't just be this new person overnight. And so, a lot of the work that I do with the clients in terms of being able to make changes is really about building confidence in their ability to make change. So, I'm really careful not to overwhelm someone with a task list or the complexity of actions that they need to take to achieve their goals. So, for example, if someone came to me and said, "Hey, Miff, I really want to go to the gym. I'm committed to going 5 days a week." My first question would be like, great, how many days are you currently going? If they're like 0 days, I'm like, great, let's aim for two. And once two is a habit and it's just something that you do, let's add on a third. And they'll be like, but I just want to get stuck in and get five. I'm like, great. We're here for a long time and a good time, not just a short time. So let's work on building these habits together. And, especially when you're going to create any sort of change in your life, you're going to come up with some sort of resistance. You'll have these limiting beliefs that pop up along the way, or you'll counter obstacles. And so, really ensuring that we're getting gradual exposure to the new behaviors and new identity that this person wants to become, we're giving the opportunity to also confront those obstacles that are coming up in a really supportive way as well. So you can continue to make that sustainable progress rather than be like, one day I couldn't hit my five, one week I couldn't hit my 5 gym sessions. All of a sudden I've failed. I'm not good at this. I can't do this anymore. I can't do any a goal. And then it starts to spiral and it has negative impacts in other areas of life. And it's just a whole shit show, really. So it's in my client's
Absolutely.
best interest to make sure that the growth is sustainable and very progressive.
So how do you get them back on track when they hit that road bump inevitably and they get into that old habit of thinking? Like how do you snap them out of it?
Yeah. So at the start of any working relationship I have with my clients, I talk them through what it means to be in victim and versus responsibility in your life. And so as part of our initial session, I go, here's what it sounds like when you're being playing in your victim mindset. Here's what it sounds like to be taking responsibility. At any point during our coaching relationship, if I hear that you are in your victim mindset, do I have your permission to nudge you back into responsibility? And I do not continue until they say yes. And so I know that I have that relationship with my client, that if they're, encountering any of their limiting beliefs and I hear any of that language, that I have permission to gently nudge them back into responsibility and to take control of their situation. And so it happens. And I think with a lot of people as well is, when you've messed up, you don't need someone to tell you that you're doing a shit job. If you're brutally honest with yourself, you can give yourself that feedback. So it's first questioning, what happened? How did we get here? We're going to build a bridge and move on. Let's do that.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think it's always to have honestly, I tell people one of the biggest roles of just having a coach is not necessarily the strategies or the tactics that
Mm,
they teach you, but it's the accountability
yes.
of you being accountable to yourself and not yes, it's okay to get into a funk. That's
Yeah.
great. Everybody does. You get upset, that's fine. Don't stay stuck there though,
Yeah.
right? It's about having somebody that is many steps ahead of you, letting you know, hey, you're doing it again,
Yeah.
right? But also somebody that you've given permission to call you out on your shit, right?
Yep.
That's really what it boils down to because a lot of people they don't want to hear that from their mate, their partner, their friends,
Oh,
but they have signed up for and paid you thousands of dollars to do that very thing, and a lot of times what I find is that a lot of that is just kind of nurturing them back onto track
yeah.
to doing the things that they know they need to be doing,
Yeah.
and it's not just teaching them some golden nugget one silver bullet strategy to lose all that weight or to build that perfect
Mm.
business or whatever it is, which is what people sometimes think that they're there for, but I don't think that is. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, a couple of things come to mind when in what you've just shared. The first one is if my husband told me, "Yes, you've done a shit job today," that would be totally different for our relationship. I was like, "No, you're not meant to say that. You're meant to say that I'm doing so well, like, love me no unconditionally. That's your job. Your job is not to be my coach." But secondly, I think for me, what has really helped with the accountability and what I support clients to do as well is set personal standards for yourself. So, we're coaches, we have bad days. I will give myself 1 day, maybe 2, depending on the severity of the situation, to be in a bit of funk and to be a bit sad sometimes, because sometimes you just need to be sad or you need to be frustrated. And then I'll be like, okay, we're done here. We need to move on. But I'll really give myself that time to feel the emotions. I won't try and suppress them or to ignore them because they are sending you a message. But I've got some personal standards for myself and I encourage my clients to develop the same, going, cool, if this happens, what is going to be your response to it? What standard are you holding yourself to? And I find that helps to be a bit more caring and nurturing in the face of what can be some really challenging times too. I think when we're talking about discipline, and that can be a really hard masculine way to look at things. And that trait really served me well through my sporting career. And what I've tried to do since is blend a bit more feminine energy back into it so you can really have a more well-rounded approach to goal achievement and success by including both elements of the masculine energy and feminine energy. So yeah, having personal standards I think is a really great way to make sure that you're achieving a goal in a way that you want to and a way that makes you feel good.
I love that. I love that the personal standards. Could you give us an example of a couple areas in, say, that you would recommend they develop their personal standards for, you know?
I think firstly, anyone who I know has achieved any amount of success has some sort of structure for their morning routine. No one gets up who has achieved anything meaningful with their life has gotten up 10 minutes before they're meant to go to work, slapped the alarm, got out, rushed, got changed, eating in the car, doing the makeup in the car, and started their day in a rush. So I definitely think as a first step, you need to create a standard or structure for your morning because that will dictate what the rest of your day looks like. And in regards
Mhm.
to what that looks like for the morning routine and how I like to use my morning, it's really embedding the person that I want to be and person that I'm becoming as well. So I always include some sort of movement, some sort of visualization, looking at my vision board, some sort of maybe positive affirmations, and then I'll put in there what I need in that particular morning. So as I mentioned, it's winter here in Canberra where I live, and I train. I'm just looking at it right now. I train in my garage, which is outside. It's -2 degrees in there most
Ooh.
mornings at the moment. So I'm actually listening to David Goggins when I go out there because I need to toughen up sometimes because it's not very pleasant in there. So I think just having some sort of structure, but allowing the flexibility to put in there whatever little something, something that you need on any given day as well can be really supportive.
Oh, that's beautiful. That's beautiful. You know what? You mentioned something earlier that I actually want to circle around on. Sorry, there's crazy dogs around this area here.
You probably heard mine
Hopefully, you
earlier.
don't hear that.
No.
Yes, no, it's all good. So, when we shift and we change, part of us is on board to make this change, right? We are the ones that are making the change and the shift in ourselves. And so part of the struggle is losing that person that you used to be.
Mm.
Okay. And one of the things that I think a lot of people struggle with is that the family members, the people that are around you, have the fear also because they're losing the person that they know. How do you help your clients navigate that, and how have you seen they navigated that successfully?
Yeah, I think it's probably most authentic if I use a personal experience, to be honest. So, as I mentioned before, when I retired from cycling, the reason I got into cycling was because of my dad. And actually, the person that I really didn't want to tell that I was most afraid to tell that I wanted to stop cycling was my dad. And because this is something
Mm,
that we really bonded over, it was his passion. That's how I got into it in the first place. And so that was probably one of the most challenging conversations that I had. He's obviously, my dad and wants what's best for me, but I can't help but feel because it's still such a big part of his life. And I'm the only one in the family he can connect to about cycling and one of his passions. So I still feel like he's holding on to part of my identity. There's Facebook memories that pop up every year for the last 10 years of me. He'll share with me, and
oh,
it's cute, but it's also a bit of a stab in the heart to me going, I'm just not that person anymore. I've grown and evolved so
mm.
much and I'm so proud of the person I am. So I think it's acknowledging that you can't dictate how people view you, and people are entitled to view you however they want to view you, and you can't control that. So I think it's two parts. It's being okay with letting go of an old identity. It took me some time, and I'm just about to transition into motherhood, and so I feel like I'm going to
Mm.
need to go through, not, I'll just call it a grieving process because that's what it is, and I'll write a letter to myself and thank them for getting me as far as I have and welcome the new version of me that I'm stepping into. But I think it's also being so sure about who you are as a person that it doesn't matter how people see you. And one of my friends keeps saying, you'll always be someone's villain, even if you don't see yourself as a villain. So I think it's the
Mm.
first thing that I would do is start to get really clear on who I am as a person, because then you'll find that you're less rocked by the opinions of others.
So how do you know you found you, or found somebody that you're comfortable with? Because
Yeah.
I think a lot of people say, "Oh, you've kind of found yourself where you don't care whatever people say." But I was like, you know what? That's not really true,
Yeah.
because we're social creatures, right? We're
Yep.
always going to care about what people say.
100%.
I think the nuance is from actually Mark Manson's book, the art of not giving a fuck, or
Yeah.
the subtle art of not giving a fuck,
Yep.
right? Is more about you become more discerning about whose opinion you actually care about,
Yes. Yes.
right? And it becomes a much smaller group of people, and not the Jimmy or Joe from Facebook that you barely know,
Ugh.
or like the random friend that you see at the pub, right? Because maybe, but they're, say, friends from forever ago, right? And then
Yep.
you just hang out with them, but you start understanding that, hey, my dad's opinion matters, my
Mm.
husband's opinion matters, my older sister's opinion matters,
Yep.
because those are the people that I look up to,
Mm.
and everybody else maybe not, right?
Yep.
So how have you transitioned in that relationship with, hearing other people's voices?
Yeah, so I think it could feel different for everyone. For me, I know that I'm
Mhm.
acting in true alignment with who I am because I feel at peace. There's just this sense of calmness
Mhm.
and peacefulness when I'm just acting in as my authentic self. And I think in terms of the opinions of others, I mean, social media is the worst place for it. Being a coach that needs to promote their business, it brings out the best and worst in people, right? And so, to your point, I think it's getting really clear on whose opinions you value, and it doesn't have to be family or close friends just because you've chosen to surround yourself with them for a long period of time. So some of the people whose opinions really matter to me, some of my biggest mentors and biggest inspirations, if they have an opinion on something, I will likely take it on board, simply due to the life paths that some other people who are quite close to me have chosen, and what they potentially think is right for me. I will take their feedback on gracefully on board and say thank you for that, but I don't necessarily do anything with it. In saying that, I also feel like it's important to be open to feedback from all places. It's whether or not you decide to take it on board or not, because people can offer you blind spots which aren't very comfortable to acknowledge. So it's being able to decipher, going, cool, is this a blind spot? Is this someone's opinion? What do I want to do with this? But back to previous points we made, is knowing that you have power and control about what you wish to do with any piece of information or how you wish to lead your life.
No, I think that's super powerful. And one of the things I actually wanted to kind of dig a little deeper on what you said was, you taking advice from mentors and things like
Mm.
that. And that really reminds me of a speech by Brene Brown.
Yeah.
So I'm pretty sure you pretty know who she is. And she has her famous, man in the arena
Yeah.
quote, speech from Theodore Roosevelt. And one of the things she always mentions is like, she's like, you know what? If you are in the cheap seats and you are just a spectator and not really in the arena getting your face marred and blood on your knees and scarred up from the experience, that I don't really value your opinion.
Yep.
Like I don't care what you say because you're not in there. And I think there is, it's sad to say, but I think the majority of people all have opinions and criticisms and things that they're happy to tell you,
Yeah.
yet they have never stepped into the arena themselves and have never understood the highs and lows all on the same
Yeah.
day of what entrepreneurship really is, right?
Yeah.
There's some days you're just like, what the f am I doing this? Should I just get a job?
100%.
And then there's some days you're like, man, this is awesome, this is what I've been dreaming of, and then like 10 minutes later you're like, oh, just all went to shit.
Yeah. Yeah.
So how do you like think about that, and how do you relate to that?
I love that quote so much. The other thing that comes to mind as well when you say that is double standards as well, and people who are willing to say, "Oh, I do XYZ, like I drink my green smoothies and do all this sort of stuff," but behind the scenes they're not doing that. And so one of my biggest values is also integrity. So I won't share something
Mm,
unless I've embodied it and I'm actually doing it. That's something that is a personal standard that I hold myself to. And I think that's the danger with social media and a lot of forums. Everyone can have an opinion. And I mean, everyone's entitled to an opinion and their point of view of the world. It's when they start to share that as truth or fact that I think it can become very damaging, or that it's coming from a really closed minded, fixed mindset and really naive place as well. One thing that I
mhm.
love to do with anyone who offers me something that I think is very closed minded is go question it, go, oh, why do you think that is? And gonna get deeper with that, or go, oh, have you considered this point of view? That's if it's someone in my life that I need to engage with. If it's something on social media or a forum, I just will let people do their own thing. But I really encourage people. I mean, I have the pleasure of working with people across a whole variety of different cultures. And if I put my Australian lens on everything, I wouldn't understand anyone ever. And so I think it's really about being open minded and curious as to why people are doing what they're doing. And so, the quote about being in the arena, it's going, they're probably doing this for a reason. I've never been in the arena before. I wonder why they're doing this. If they haven't been successful, there might be a reason why they weren't successful. If it was a sporting thing, maybe they changed up their technique. Maybe they've been sick for a week. Maybe they ate some dodgy food before the event. So it's really approaching things with a mind of curiosity and a growth mindset rather than something fixed and where you're only seeing the world through your own lens.
No, that's really nuanced, and I think that's really insightful because I think a lot of people, and myself included, and as my girlfriend has pointed out recently, a lot of times I would be maybe quick to say get annoyed
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
like short tempered with certain things, and I'm like, why do you keep asking that? And I was been kind of so she is a NLP master practitioner
Cool.
herself. So of course very good with language. And so she was like, instead of getting annoyed with me, could you ask, hey, I've noticed that you asked me this question 3 times now. What am I missing? Or am I not answering it some way that you're missing? Instead of just being like, why do you keep asking this stupid question?
Yeah.
I've already answered it, right? And so I myself, having done all the work and Tony Robbins
Yeah.
and Dispenza and all this stuff, find myself doing the same thing, right? And sometimes you have to really catch yourself in the words that you use and like how you approach like if you what I found is that if I approach it with more curiosity,
Yeah.
I find myself less defensive,
Mm.
less annoyed, but also invite them into what I'm really thinking versus just kind of getting upset, right? And
Yeah.
which, as you know, and your partner devolves into a little spit spat, kind of thing, and it doesn't really, it's not productive actually, right? It just ends up being two people just really not communicating.
Oh, it's such a powerful tool to be able to do, to be able to recognize when you're being triggered, take a moment to pause
Hmm.
and become curious. That's probably one of the most powerful skill sets I've developed, to use a personal example. And because you'll never know the detail of someone's past experiences. And so I remember my husband and I went to a cafe and I was like, oh, what did you want to eat here? And he's like, the thing we spoke about. And I was like, I honestly can't remember what we spoke about. And he flipped it and he lost it. He's like, stuff it, let's go home then. And I was like, what has happened? Because seemingly to me, he just flipped it at me, forgetting something. And so went for a walk and I got curious about it. I was like, hey, just share with me what happened here, because I honestly just can't remember. I mean, I'm very forgetful, so that's not something that I need to remind him. I'm not very good at remembering a lot of things. That's a limiting belief. I've checked myself on that. Let's work on that. So he said, in my previous relationships, I had one relationship in particular where she was gaslighting me the whole time. She would say things were untrue, or she would say, no, you did this and XYZ when I didn't do it. So in that moment, I got triggered. I thought you were gaslighting me. And I was like, oh shit, I am so sorry. I didn't know that was your past experience. And I'm sorry that that triggered you in that way. Know that I'm not your ex girlfriend. I'm just really forgetful. And so now we had this beautiful moment to really connect over something as opposed to make it a really horrible experience for both of us. So I think just the ability to stop, breathe, get curious can improve relationships not only with your romantic partner, but with everyone.
Yeah, no, that's actually so beautiful because I think people that are not as trained as you would have reacted very differently, right? Because that could be the beginning of multiple hours of
Ah,
you said this, I said this. Why do you always do this, right? Which are like,
it was tempting.
terrible, terrible. Right, right. And I think a lot of times people that are not as skilled in terms of becoming very curious that they do that, and unfortunately it
Yeah.
usually exacerbates into something else, right? It goes into passive aggressive behavior
Yeah.
and other, let's dig out all the things we've been resentful about in the last 2 months.
Yeah. Not a good time for anyone.
And yes, so that's awesome. And so let me ask you this: in terms of your business, and you are building this and you are creating your business, how do you ensure that you are still taking care of your health, your pregnancy, and not neglecting the husband and things like that?
For someone who can be really single focused, it's not easy. I'm not going to lie. If I have a goal that I'm focused on, it's really easy for me to go all in. It's harder for me to take a step back and look at things more holistically. But again, I think for me, it comes around to having those personal standards. So, what my morning routine looks like, that's a really big opportunity for me for self care, check in, to push myself, do something really for me. I get up at 4:30 every morning, which for some people, they're like, oh my God, that's early, but it's the time that that I have that's completely uninterrupted. That's really mine and sets the tone for the day. So morning routine is definitely a big component of it. The next one is
Mhm.
also, and I've learned this, is communication with my partner as well. Just going, hey, for example, I'm heading into a big program launch. I'm going to need a bit more time to focus on this, but I've got Wednesday night free. I would love to do something together and let's go out to dinner. And, we've got some activities that we want to do on the weekend. But to enable me to be fully present for those, I need to get this shit done beforehand. And so I need to really apply
Mm.
myself. So communication has been a huge one. And then also acknowledging when that it's okay to rest. I think especially if you're a high achiever, you really can bounce from one project to the next without taking a moment to pause and reflect. And that's probably something that I've been integrating more consciously since the start of the year, since falling pregnant, is really trying to balance the masculine and feminine energies a little bit more. It's about pushing forward, but also taking a moment to pause, reflect, so you can move forward at a greater pace or with greater momentum. So I think those three things is pause and reflect and combining that with momentum, communication with the people around you who are going to be impacted by doing the work that you do, and then also making sure that you have time for yourself, whether that's a morning routine, evening wind down, even better if it's both, but making sure you do have set time just for yourself.
That's beautiful. So to me, like what I've also found for myself was that morning routine
Yeah.
is quite important as well. It kind of helps me kind of get balance and I journal as well, so
Yeah.
it kind of helps me like offload anything that is kind of been stewing in my mind, whether it's been psychological stress or business stress or whatever it is. That for me, journaling has been the thing, but meditation as
Yeah.
well. So I meditate as well, and I found that I notice my body, being very different, if I don't go for meditation for like a week or more,
Yeah.
right? When you start feeling like you're like, I just don't feel as grounded or approach the day with as
Mm.
much grace, I guess we'll call it
Yeah.
that, and so how hard was it for you to kind of develop those? Because I know a lot of people, as you get older, I think we get settled into our habits.
Yes.
Like, how do you get and train that new habit for you? And how do you tell your clients to do that?
Yeah, so I think again, it's probably personalized for the individual. So I was just thinking of one client in particular who loves a routine, loves same day in day out. She thrives off that. So together we created a set morning routine with her with times that she does everything. She sets a timer to tell her to move on to the next task, all that sort of stuff. For myself, I see the value in set routines when you're learning a skill, but my goal for myself is to get to a point where it's not if I'll do something, it's when I'll do something. And I like to have I guess a toolbox of tools I can leverage at any point in time as opposed to just relying on one. So for my morning routines,
Mm,
there's non-negotiables in terms of components of them. So there's something for the body in terms of movement, there'll be something for the mind and something for the spirit, but I have a whole bunch of different tools that sit underneath each of those categories that I'll implement depending on what I need. So it will look similar day to day just because it's easy to do. But I also know that I have the option if it's not feeling like it's going to serve me, if it feels like it's pulling me out of alignment, or if I really get pulled to do a particular meditation one morning, then I know I have the space to include that.
yeah, no, I think it's the principle of taking time for yourself, but
Yeah.
the individual tools you use to kind of do it can
Yes.
vary. And
Yes.
I 100% agree with that. Sometimes it is, a different type of meditation
Yeah.
or just gratitude journaling
Yeah.
or just, writing your thoughts into your journal. I find that it's just something
Yeah.
sometimes, sometimes you may feel like you're pressure for time and you're like,
Yes.
as long as I get in like something small, if
Literally.
it's kind of you're on a weird schedule or you're traveling, which makes it really difficult, right? Because you got all these new weird one-off routines or like schedules that you can't do.
Yeah.
So, in terms of how somebody could find you, how would they go about doing that, Myth?
Yeah, so I'm very active on Instagram, so they can find me there at Myff Galloway, and I also have my website myffgalloway.com. They're probably the two places I hang out the most.
Okay, perfect. And how would they know they'd be a good fit for your coaching?
If they are ready to get into the work, that they know they're capable of more, that they know it's time to start living life on their own terms, then they'll be the right client for me.
Okay. And you accept clients anywhere in the world or what?
Yeah, so I recently created an online program. So I do see clients online all around the world, but I've made my services and the framework that I use with my one on one clients more accessible by offering it as an online course, which is a combination of self paced modules and live calls as well. So depending on how someone best needs support, I've opened up my offerings to be able to accommodate that for people all over the world.
Fantastic. Well, Myth, thank you so much for your time today. I've thoroughly loved the conversation. I've learned actually so much from you. And thank you for your time.
Thank you so much for having me. Again, I learned a lot too. I've got a bunch of notes here actually. So thank you for your time as well and for having me on the show.
All right, take care.